Hello, my name is Richard Ratson, and I am on the faculty of the University School of Medicine in the Department of Cell Biology. This is the third in a series of videos I've created for YouTube on the derivation of anatomical terms. The first one was on the pectoral girdle and upper extremity, and the second one was on the abdomen, and this third one is on Treitz's contributions to knowledge of abdominal anatomy. I'm hoping that these videos will express and allow people to share my enthusiasm with the derivation of anatomical terms, since they involve the history of medicine and language and are a unique aspect of our medical profession. My enthusiasm began when I was a Greek and Latin major in college as a pre-med minor, and I've continued that interest and enthusiasm ever since. I find that this interest not only helps me learn anatomical structures, but also adds an element of enjoyment that I would not otherwise be getting without the knowledge of the linguistic etymologies. The ligament of Treitz is a structure that Wenzel Treitz described in 1853. I'm not really sure why, but it's often miscited as 1857. And he published it in German. And as you can see on the right, this is an original drawing from his paper, and it shows the ligament of Treitz arising from the diaphragm going down to the junction of the duodenum and jejunum, and it's courtesy of Clinical Anatomy Associates, as is a future illustration. The ligament of Treitz itself is a thin band of tissue that rises from the diaphragm, and it's initially skeletal or voluntary muscle, then there's cartilaginous tissue, and then there's smooth or involuntary muscle that actually inserts onto the junction of the duodenum and the jejunum. And as such, it helps in peristalsis. It's also called a suspensory muscle of the duodenum or ligament. It clinically helps surgeons distinguish the boundary between the upper and lower GI tracts, and the entry of the retroperitoneal duodenum into the peritoneal cavity to become the intraperitoneal jejunum, and it's sometimes useful for helping to diagnose the source of hemorrhage, GI hemorrhage. Here's a cartoon, again, courtesy of Clinical Anatomy Associates, that shows the ligament arising from the right crus as a skeletal muscle, and then the green portion is tendon, and finally the smooth muscle attaching to the junction of the duodenum and the jejunum. Since the duodenum enters the peritoneal cavity through an opening in the retroperitoneal tissue, it thereby allows this opening allows the potential for a hernia in the other direction, and which is why Treitz called it the retroperitoneal hernia, because the loop of bowel can go through that same opening that the duodenum enjoys for its entry into the peritoneal cavity. The loop of bowel can go through that opening and become a retroperitoneal hernia. Here again are original diagrams from Treitz's publication, 1857. And here, courtesy of Siriser et al., who published a report of a laparoscopic reduction of a hernia, a retroperitoneal, in 2019, you can see on the left the loop of bowel going through the port, they call it, into the retroperitoneum, and then on the right is post-reduction, which they accomplished very easily with laparoscopic surgery. Like Treitz the man was an interesting man who was an ardent nationalist for the Czech cause. He was born in Hostimice, Bohemia. Bohemia was the area of also Hungary at the time that had a lot of Czech-speaking people and nationalists. And you have to remember that in the mid-19th century, many entities, political entities, were experienced burgeoning nationalism to retain their own borders and their own language. After Treitz finished medical school in Prague, he went to the University of Krakow, briefly published his paper on the ligament, and then a few years later published the paper on the retroperitoneal hernia. And he finished up his career in Prague in 1855, staying there until his death by suicide using cyanide, probably the result of a long-standing depression, fueled in no small part by the friction from his primary German-speaking medical colleagues, who resented the fact that he preferred to give his talks to the Czech students in Czech, not in German, which was a lingua franca of Austro-Hungary at the time. And you can see here where he was born in Hostimise. In the middle, the pink area is Bohemia, that area of Austro-Hungary that had Czech speakers. And in the next picture, you can see a map of the same area, and the orange is Czech, where he was, and the whole area was also spoke German, but you can see the Ruthenian, which is now called Ukrainian language, Romanian, Serbian. It was a polyglot nation which not only had lots of native speakers in different languages, but very partisan views about their independent status. Another reason for his suicide was just a long suffering, besides depression, was the abscesses he sustained from the many dissections and autopsies he did. In his brief bibliography, which has both specific references to Treitz and other references to anatomical terms in general, you can also see at the bottom whonamedit.com, which is a URL for a wonderful site. It's a rich resource for the history of medicine, very well researched and referenced, and includes many, many eponyms. I hope you will see this video and others that I do, and begin to appreciate the linguistic background and enjoyment of the derivation of anatomical terms. Thank you very much for your attention.